Shalom and welcome back to Israel with Aline. And a very warm welcome to our Easter special, the Resurrection Sunday special. Today we will follow the last steps of Jesus on the Via Dolorosa until we reach Mount Calvary, the site of the crucifixion. We will enter the empty tomb of Jesus and see what Easter is like this year, how Jerusalem is or isn't celebrating Easter during these days of war. Join us on this journey, which is different from any other we've ever taken here on the channel. So if you're ready, let's get started. We're at the beginning of the Via Dolorosa. You can see the number 1 here. It marks the first station, the start of this path. If we had arrived at this place 2,000 years ago, there was a gigantic fortress here called the Antonia Fortress. And in it was Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, and Jesus is brought to him. He is judged and sentenced to death by crucifixion. And here at the Antonia Fortress, he also receives the cross. And he is forced to carry the cross through the streets of the city to the place of crucifixion. This path is called the Way of the Cross, or Via Sacra, or the Via Dolorosa, and it is the path that we are going to walk together now. The Via Dolorosa path is approximately 1 kilometer long and most of it is uphill. Easter in the Holy Land is usually a time of celebration and joy, a time when people talk about hope and resurrection. However, this year we are experiencing an extremely different Easter, because we are in the middle of a war with Iran, and Iran is intentionally attacking civilian areas as well as holy places, including with fragmentation missiles. Since the beginning of the war, dozens of times the sirens have sounded here in Jerusalem because of missiles launched from Iran, and the warhead of one of those missiles fell inside the old city. Look at these images. See how close it is to the Dome of the Rock. And fragments of other missiles that were intercepted also fell in the old city, including on the Temple Mount, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre complex, and in the Jewish quarter. And since here in the old city there are no bomb shelters or safe places where people can hide, at the moment of an attack, when a siren goes off, when a missile is launched, that's why the government of Israel made an extremely difficult decision, which was to restrict access to the old city. There were days when the old city was completely closed to everyone who doesn't live inside, and access to the holy sites was restricted. That includes the Western Wall for Jews, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount complex for Muslims, and the Garden Tomb and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for Christians. I want to make that very clear, that these restrictions apply to all religions here inside the old city. It's literally a matter of saving lives because of the attacks from Iran. But I am really outraged by what I saw in the mainstream media, or at least in part of the mainstream media this past week. We saw news coming out talking about religious restrictions against Christians, discrimination, and that's not the truth. Now, there was the Jewish Passover on Wednesday, and the chief rabbi of Israel was also not allowed to go to the Western Wall to celebrate. All the holy sites were closed. However, the government did make an exception now for the Easter weekend, both on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Some churches were allowed to reopen inside the old city for celebrations. However, with a very limited number of people, We can open the discussion about whether the holy sites in the old city should be closed to save human lives because of the war and the attacks from Iran. But let's make it very clear that not all the holy sites in Israel are closed. There are churches, synagogues, and mosques open in other places in the country. In places where there are bomb shelters, yes. There are places where people can protect themselves. You can also leave your opinion here in the comments. If you think this security measure is right or not, what would you do in this situation? But what I can't accept are fake news and the misinformation that is spread about this city, because the reality is very clear. Both the Wailing Wall, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Tomb of Jesus have restrictions during these days, but this is really because of the war. But what I mainly want to say is that I hope this will be the last Easter that we spend this way, and that next year we can come back this way and talk only about joy and about things that are truly biblical, historical, and important. However, even with everything that is happening these days, it's very important for us to show the reality and to walk this path despite everything. So now I want to invite you to follow the Via Dolorosa. We see small groups of Christians passing by and following the Via Dolorosa. Yes, this is allowed. What is not allowed are large processions with hundreds or thousands of people, like it is done every other year. We have reached a crucial point in our journey because the Via Dolorosa splits here. And it's a complex reality, but one that we need to tell you about. There isn't just one tomb of Jesus. Instead, there are two places that could possibly be the true tomb of Jesus. One of these places is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the Via Dolorosa that leads to the Holy Sepulchre is in this direction, passing through the stations of the Via Dolorosa. And the other possible location of Calvary and the sepulchre is the place called the Garden Tomb, which is in this direction. And that's what we're going to do together now. But here on the channel, we have videos showing both the Garden Tomb and the Holy Sepulchre. And I recommend you watch both also, so each of you can draw your own conclusions. But now come with me to the Garden Tomb.
Behind me are 400 truckloads of Temple Mount soil that were illegally dumped in 1999 like trash. But two archaeologists refused to let it disappear. They rescued the soil and created the Temple Mount Sifting Project. Today, over 500,000 artifacts have been recovered. Pottery from Solomon's temple, coins from Jesus' time, pieces of history that were meant to be lost forever. Now you can be part of this rescue mission, get authentic Temple Mount soil delivered to your door, and help keep biblical archaeology alive. Scan the QR code or use the link below.
Many people who walk this path for the first time are surprised that it looks like other streets here in the old city of Jerusalem. There isn't a big red carpet rolled out here or big markings, but that's exactly the historical truth. When Pontius Pilate forces Jesus to carry the cross through the streets of the city, they were ordinary streets, and preferably busy streets, so that the maximum number of people could witness the humiliation and suffering of Jesus. I live here in Jerusalem, and I've walked these streets many times, especially here on the Via Dolorosa. And to see this place like this with so few people, with most of the shops and businesses closed, It's really very striking and a constant reminder of the war and the days we're living through. Look at how the Via Dolorosa is during Holy Week. In any other year, there would be thousands and thousands of people here, walking and celebrating Jesus' Easter.
The Easter of Jesus week.
We just crossed through the Damascus Gate. That means we are outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And this is very important because we know that the crucifixion and tomb of Jesus took place outside the walls of Jerusalem.
The full Passover.
Look where we are. Read the sign here, written in English, Arabic, and Hebrew, the Garden Tomb. But if we look, the door is closed. But don't worry, it will reopen soon. And then we'll be able to go in and show you firsthand, in these days of war and conflict, the entire Garden Tomb. Easter. We are walking where the garden of Joseph of Arimathea used to be. And we can see here how there is still a garden even to this day. And this place conveys an impressive sense of tranquility and peace. However, when the Bible refers to a garden, it usually wasn't referring to a flower garden, to a green place that was simply decorative. Instead, back then, a garden usually referred to an agricultural area. So imagine that back then, this whole area here was mainly agricultural. For example, there could have been orchards here. And now let's walk through the garden. It's impressive to see the contrast here, because outside there's literally a war going on. Sirens are blaring incessantly all over Israel. And suddenly we enter the garden tomb. We feel this tranquility, this peace. It feels like we've entered a parallel world. And more than that, what we see from the people who are here today is an unshakable faith. And that's beautiful. We see how the faith in Jerusalem and throughout the Holy Land remains unshakable. But let's talk specifically about the place where we are. Here is Mount Calvary, also known as Golgotha or the Skull Hill. And we can see the shape of this hill, which is clearly a human skull. And this shape was even clearer until a few years ago, when a big snowstorm tore off part of what looked like the nose of this hill. But we are looking at old photos and historical photos of this place, and in them you can see this shape much more clearly. Also in the historical photos you can see the hill and its shape more clearly, because these later constructions didn't exist, especially this bus station. What we see down here is an Arab bus station, and above it there's a Muslim cemetery. And that's why it also covers part of the hill, especially the lower part. And this also doesn't allow us access to the place, since these are Arab and Muslim areas. You can't get there That's why we stop at this point, which belongs to the garden tomb, and from here we can clearly see the place of the skull and Calvary. But the most important thing about this place isn't the hill itself, but what happened here on Good Friday during Holy Week. And they took Jesus to Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they crucified him and divided his clothes among themselves, casting lots to see what each one would get. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him, and the inscription with the accusation against him read, "The King of the Jews." When noon came, darkness fell over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 o'clock Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But Jesus, letting out a loud cry, breathed his last. This is the place of the crucifixion and the death of Jesus on the cross. And after his death, a very rich and important man named Joseph of Arimathea asked Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, for permission to take Jesus' body down from the cross to bury him, which was unusual. Normally, people who were crucified were left on the cross. But Pontius Pilate makes this exception. And the Bible tells us that next to the place of the crucifixion, there was a garden, and in this garden, a new tomb. The Bible also tells us that this tomb belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. Then the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross, prepared, anointed according to biblical traditions, and taken to the tomb. And now we are going to walk through the garden towards the tomb. Let's go. A question that arises is, how can we know that this place was an agricultural area, a garden in the time of Jesus? Of course, these plants, these trees are not from that time, not even close. But what we do have here are archaeological excavations, and agricultural installations have been found. For example, this cistern. So here there was a cistern that was used to store water during the rainy season, which is winter, and that way they could irrigate this garden throughout the whole year. And there's one more agricultural site here that I want to show you. What we see here is a wine press, which means a place to stomp grapes to produce juice or wine. This shows once again that this was an agricultural area, and there is a chance that part of this garden of Joseph of Arimathea was a vineyard or a small grape-growing plot. And we can see that very close to this agricultural facility, in the middle of this garden, we can already see the empty tomb. And in the middle of this large garden, we see a tomb carved into the rock, and literally just a tomb. This wasn't a large cemetery, but rather we see an agricultural area with a tomb inside. And everything we see here fits very well with the biblical description, even in the smallest details. Look at this, right here at the entrance, we can see a groove. This space here held a large stone that rolled back and forth to open and close the tomb. And this original stone that opened and closed it, it's no longer here, it disappeared over time, but the marks on the stone prove without a doubt that it really existed. There are also small inscriptions here on the stone. There are ancient Christian symbols both here outside and on the inside. These are Christian symbols that were drawn during the Byzantine period, which is the first Christian period in the Holy Land. And they show that this was a place of Christian worship, not from modern times, but truly from ancient times. And the most impressive thing, in my opinion, is what's on this side. You can see a big crack running along the stone. We can see it here. It's now filled with concrete, which they used for stability reasons, but we can see this crack. Why is this important? We see here a big crack that was caused by the powerful earthquake. The earthquake was so strong that it collapsed part of the original tomb, so this part that was rebuilt centuries later is because there were structural problems here due to that earthquake. But here the crack runs and runs and it doesn't continue to the other side. And that means the tomb, this doorway, had already been carved before the earthquake happened. Do you understand what we're saying? There was a big earthquake here that damaged this tomb. A big earthquake that happened right in this area, and it happened after the tomb had already been carved. And this also fits with what is written in the Bible, what happened right after the death of Jesus. And Jesus, crying out again with a loud voice, gave up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two. From top to bottom, the earth shook and the rocks split. And now that we understand all the archaeology of this place, let's get to what really matters. Let's enter the empty tomb. We are here with João Batista Evangelista. He is Brazilian and has been living here in the Holy Land for over 30 years.
Exactly.
And he is a volunteer at the Garden Tomb. He is one of the people who help guard and protect this very important place. And now that we are in front of the empty tomb, I wanted to ask you what message you have to send to everyone who is watching us on this very important day.
Shalom, shalom from here at the Garden Tomb. We are in a very special place here. Jesus was crucified very close to here. And he was buried in a new tomb that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. And we can believe in tomorrow because he rose again. The light came into the world. And my wish is that this light keeps shining in your life and in the lives of your family members as well. This very special Easter in 2026.
So even though the world and the Middle East and Israel are going through difficult days, let's embrace the light that comes from God. Let's appreciate the importance of this date and keep praying for peace for all the peoples here in the Middle East.
Amen. Shalom, shalom.
And from this very important biblical place, we want to wish all of you and your families a happy and blessed Easter, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much, João.